Alright, welcome to episode 2 of the Edge Fuel Injection Adventure. This will be probably really more the main episode of actually the installation of the system, the nitty gritty, the down and dirty, the good stuff. So I got to start off by taking off, all the old factory 914 stuff. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time filming and showing you guys that, just because depending on what engine you start with, this may or may not have anything to do with what somebody else would be going through. So I'll take a few clips of it, but really with the 914, and it's a little more involved to take apart, because you got to take apart you got to take off the manifold and all the sensors and the wiring and the TCU and fuel pump relays and fuel pumps and all kinds of junk that like a 912 doesn't have. So we're not going to spend a ton of time doing that. The one thing that does stay, I will make a note of this, is the servo that runs the wastegate. So the servo has got the cable that operates the wastegate and controls the boost. That remains and interfaces with the Edge system. But for the most part, we'll do this and then we'll get started on the actual, install. Alright, so started pulling things apart here a little bit ago, and I just wanted to touch on a couple of things. So I just pulled out the wideband sensor for my NGK wideband, and just look at how charcoaled up and black this sensor is. Okay, and if you look at the exhaust, I have it covered right now so that when I pull the cowl it doesn't scratch my blued finish I did. But I was wrapping this towel in there, and literally charcoal was flaking off and falling out of the exhaust. And the whole side of the airplane gets filthy from the exhaust, even though it sticks way out. Okay, and anyway, the point I'm trying to make here is that the mixture with these carbs is actually just so bad. Okay, it's lean. It's lean enough. I mean, it's like I couldn't run it any leaner. Okay, because you got cylinders that are hot. Wide open cruise, doesn't matter. There's cylinders that are warm enough. You don't really want to lean it out. I mean, I could have leaned it out a little bit, but I could have leaned it out a little bit at wide open throttle, actually. I really couldn't lean it out in cruise because I don't like running them, super, super hot. But the point I'm trying to make is this isn't coming from all of the cylinders, or at least not all of the time. When I'm seeing a 11.5 air-fuel ratio on the wideband at wide open throttle, that's a good, healthy, safe air-fuel ratio for a turboed application, and it won't charcoal up everything that extensively. But when the EGTs are 100 or 150 degrees spread between them, that tells you what's going on. You've got some cylinders that are super rich, okay, and some that are, on the verge of, you don't want to run them any leaner. Same with cruise. Cruise is even worse, like 200 degrees off at times. That's one of the things I'm most looking forward to getting rid of. I mean, sure, more power is awesome, but I'm not even trying to push it up much higher, maybe just a little bit, because it makes a lot of power. It's not really lacking power, but this crap, we're just charcoaling everything to death, those days are limited here. Okay. Oh, a little gas in the float bowl still. There we go. Well, there's a pile of stuff that's no longer on the airplane. All right, well, it's mostly done. I put in my big old fuel filter there, and that comes out of all the wing tanks feed together and then feed through this. This is the inlet into the top of the tank. The outlet is down here, and boy, all this stuff just barely cleared. It's closer than I like, but there's like a 1/4 inch between that, so it doesn't come close when you move it. And there's just a little bit of clearance here. But anyway, this is the feed out of the bottom. I've got another filter. You know, obviously most debris is going to come in from the outside world. That's the big one. This is just in case something comes out of a line or whatever, it'll pick it up there. Edge also supplies a fuel filter and a last chance screen in their pump housing, so I think we're going to be pretty solidly filtered. Some of this is a little hokier than I wanted. This line was supposed to reach that fitting and it was like 1 inch short. There's nothing I could do. So okay, I've been working on probably one of the more challenging aspects of this thing, and that is you got to pull the bolt that holds the flywheel on the back of the crank out to put the trigger wheel on. And I've been trying to do it without pulling the engine off, okay? And, you know, it'd be a lot easier if you pull the engine loose and probably take less time and a lot less stressful and end up doing a better job. So I'd hate to do it right. So here I am, freaking doing it this way. So you'll notice I had to build a special socket. So I bought a socket and I had to machine it down with carbide because these impact sockets are made out of good stuff. And I was able to machine that down enough that it'll fit in there, and I popped it loose. So now I'm working it out of there. And I'm hoping there's going to be enough clearance to put it all back together. So I was trying to avoid, you know, pulling the engine off the firewall or off the ring mount or pulling the ring mount off the engine mount or, okay, start over. So I was trying to avoid pulling the, like the engine mount off the firewall or the ring mount off the engine mount or whatever, any of that stuff. And then it turns out I kind of actually need to, and I don't have my cherry picker over here. So I really actually have a good reason not to. So I got the torque wrench on there and got the bolt tight, but can't get said torque wrench off of there because there's not enough clearance to back it out. I was able to pop it in, but of course you can't get it out. So I pulled, well, this nut I pulled completely off, but I pulled the all the other nuts on the ring mount, backed them out to about as loose as I can get it, and I think that's going to give me the clearance to get the damn wrench out. All right, just one really quick tip. When you're putting in the bracket over here on the ignition boxes that hooks on where one of the coolant outlets is and where you're hooking on all your grounds, by the time you put that bracket on there and all those grounds, you're piling up the, you know, it gets pretty tall, and that little bolt doesn't have a lot of threads in the head, and it's in aluminum, you know, so you really don't want to be too iffy on that. So anyway, quick tip, if you take one of the short bolts that held the old manifolds onto the head and use it, it's like the perfect length longer to accommodate all the grounds in the bracket, and it gives you back a nice chunk of threads there. So that's one little quick tip. The other one, and actually this may be covered in more detail in the installation manual, so this may not be a tip, but just double check, make sure you've got your water temperature sensor housing on the hot side of the engine, which is the side that comes out of the expansion tank. So, all right, so I'm working on a pipe for the coolant system to extend back up to the expansion tank now that's been moved to connect to the rest of the system. Just a 1-inch thin walled, you know, aluminum pipe, but I was going to show, so I cut these off at the right length for the application, but there's no, you know, there's no ridge or humped edge or, you know, whatever to catch to make sure it can't come out. And I was just going to say, a lot of you guys probably know this, but you can make your own. Normally, if I'm working with larger pipes, like a boost pipe, I'll use a crescent wrench, get it to fit on there, and then go all the way around and work it. And I've done that, you know, by hand and put 35 pounds of boost on those pipes and never had them blown off. So, you know, there's not as much pressure as that, of course, in the coolant system, but you can take a pair of pliers, or you want something that's a little narrower than like a crescent wrench so you can get in there and make a tighter moves, but you just work the corners out a little bit. You don't have to go crazy, and just try to do it as smoothly and nicely as you can, and you'll end up with like a little flared edge. Perfect. It's a nice little subtle flare. Take and file it down a little bit, but do it right. Do it once, hopefully, at least on this. There we go. So just some minor flared edges. Make sure we don't lose that coolant line. Don't want that to happen. All right, just a quick shot of where I'm at working on these coolant lines. No big deal. You got to cut and fit the coolant lines, and you got to move. You have to move at least this one, this elbow. I actually heated and moved this one too. So what you do is you heat them with a heat gun for a couple minutes, get them real good and toasty. It breaks loose the sealant in there. Those are threaded in. Do this with this off, obviously, you know, not on the head. And then you can unthread it, clean it up a little bit, and then put some 648 or 242. There's a couple different kinds of Loctite you can use. And anyway, then you thread them back in, get them angled where you want them, and then just let them set up. That's how they do that. So I changed these two to get this, you know, over here in this corner where it's out of the way. The other two don't need to be modified. They're essentially pointing close enough. All right, even though I can't imagine it not being able to ground through these two riveted on plates that hold this thing on, I decided to make up just a quick little wire here, nothing fancy, that'll connect from there and go to one of these holes that I have to plug anyway on the firewall where various things came through I don't need anymore. And I'll just go ahead and make darn sure it's grounded out. All right, finishing up the fuel pump install, or at least for the most part. So I've got those two riveted on mounts, and then one little standoff here, and this sucker is solid. I stopped to work on the wiring stuff just a little bit here, and I was looking around going, okay, well, technically I'll need one switch to run the ECU, because the fuel pumps, I already have switches for that. But I want two switches. I want two toggle switches to give power to the ECU, you know, to where either one will work, because I've had toggle switches quit before, and I don't want to be relying on that. So I have two separate power wires to feed both the switches, and then that'll go to the ECU. But I didn't have a place really to put in two more switches that I could easily get to. Everything's just getting really cluttered. So I fabbed up this little panel over here in the corner, and it has this bolt you can see, because I had to put an Adele clamp behind there. I didn't want to rivet into the structure. But I'll take the look of a bolt versus the there was a whole bunch of wiring all just coiled up and just stuck in this corner. Just a big gob of wiring, and I hated it. So that covers that up a little bit, trims it out, cleans it up a little bit, and I got room for a couple of switches and maybe an LED, you know, or something to tell me when it's powered up. So I stopped because I had to rewire the tach, because the tach feed, the wires used to come from the TCU, but now they come directly from the trigger. And then I had to move my fuel pressure sender. It was on the inside of the airplane. I moved it out here, you know, just after the fuel pumps, so I get accurate fuel pressure. So I've had to stop and redo some wiring, and it's not really part of the Edge kit per se, but because of that, because of the kit, I've had to stop and change some stuff. Just building it up with shrink tubing, because you got different sized wires, and then you got the connector that I'm trying to shrink tube over the top of, and of course it's a lot bigger than the wire, so I build up next to the connector with small shrink tubing until I can put a piece big enough to go over the whole thing and grab on both ends, you know. Alright, there's a new Skytech starter. You know, I've used a couple of these in the past, and man, they crank the snot out of a Rotax. So I haven't had any trouble with them, but I didn't fly you know, a ton of hours behind these like I have, I guess, OEM starters, so hopefully I'm not making a mistake. Okay, a little tip for you guys. If you're doing one of these installs and you've got the inside injector version like I do to fit the narrow cowl. Oh, God. Take the bolts on the inside and work those by hand a whole bunch. Try to make them, lube them up, whatever you got to do to make them go in as easy as you can by hand. You're trying to put these in, okay, these inside ones here, and you can't get to it with the water lines and everything else in the way. It might even be worth putting the intake manifold on first and then doing the water lines. I mean, you'd have to reclock your elbows and get that done, but don't actually put the lines on maybe. I don't know how much it'd help, but I've made up several special tools, cut off little Allen wrenches. I have one here somewhere. Show you an example. I made up like a couple of these, okay, and it doesn't matter. I still can't get to it. Couldn't even get enough of a bite to make enough of a turn. You got this crap in the way. You got this crap in the way. And if I could get them to go by hand, if I could have reached around the intake manifold like this and threaded those on, I might have been able to at least tighten them, with a tool. But trying to spin them, 50 turns down in there when you're unable to even move enough to do any good is literally going to take the rest of my life. So, little tip there. I'm also considering taking a drill bit, if I can find one that's just ever so slightly bigger than these holes. I mean, not much, and I might just clearance them a little bit if I have the right bit. I don't want to drill them out much, of course. All right, so I took the manifold back off, and I worked the bolts in and out by hand with a little bit of oil until I got them to go in real nice. And then I took a 17/64 bit, which is like a 64th bigger than what these holes were. I mean, ever so slightly, just ran it through. It just shaved off a tiny little bit, and that allowed these bolts to fit in there much better, and now they're going in by hand. Okay, so I just made up some fuel lines. This is the second one, using the method they outline for you. These are not my favorite type of lines. I'm more of a push slot guy. I mean, these are really good. These are definitely quality connections and clean. You don't have to have hose clamps or anything like that. Don't get me wrong. But they are a little bit of a pain to work with. It takes some time to put these together correctly. But anyway, I got them together, cleaned them out real good. That's the other thing. Make sure you clean these out real good, because when you saw off the hose with a hacksaw and you're digging around in the end and getting everything lined up, there's definitely a lot of junk there that you need to clean out. So just be advised that you want to do that. The other one is over there, and it's on the rail. You can see it down below that red wire. It's on the rail coming around to the fuel filter. This one comes off the fuel filter like this. Sorry, there we go. So that'll connect there, and then it connects here onto the fuel pump. So that one will go there. And then there's the last one. It has to come across and hit the regulator. I think I'll probably make up the line, I guess, and then mount the regulator. Or, well, actually probably what I'll do is install this line and then mount the regulator to be out of the way of this one. Anyway, mounted the this little manifold distribution block here. And, this is the kind of stuff that you don't plan on when you're doing a kit. I probably spent an hour sitting here on the ladder, moving this thing around, trying to figure out where I wanted to put it. And where I put it is by no means some beautiful, excellent, looking job. I'll probably put a little standoff here, by the way, so that this can't get to shaking too much, but because it's important. You don't want this coming loose. The fuel pressure regulator needs that reference so that it raises the fuel pressure when the boost goes up. Otherwise, you'll go lean. So it's very important that that's hooked up. So I will secure that with a second standoff to make sure this is really solid. But the reason I stuck it right out there, it's kind of hokey, just like this, but it's out of my way. I didn't really have room on the Firewall to put it anywhere, and I'm looking around, and it just could not place it in there anywhere that it wasn't going to be buried down in there somewhere where I can't get to stuff or be in the way of something else. I'm trying to bring things up and out a little bit, okay? So that you can still reach in behind and work on stuff. You know, I can still get in around this and get to these fittings and the wiring and whatever. I didn't want to cram it all in there too tight in one big glob because you can't work on stuff. So that was my idea with a lot of this, like the fuel pumps. I could change a fuel pump, you know, pretty easy. I mean, obviously you can't just pop one out. You do have to take this loose, but the bolts are accessible. And then, you know, the fittings are accessible, and boom, you could pull this whole thing out. It's not buried behind some coolant lines or a bunch of wiring or whatever. So that's my theory on how to do things. I'm not saying it's the best or it couldn't be laid out better. Don't get me wrong. This isn't the most beautiful install I've ever seen. It's functional, and even though it's not the prettiest, I think it's going to be, you know, reliably laid out, and I'm not going to have issues with most of this stuff, I hope. Today I'm working on the wiring harness. Ran into one little snag. There was supposed to be an adapter that lets you go from this wastegate servo plug. There's supposed to be an adapter that lets you, you have to pin it out actually, or you have to, you know, repin the factory wastegate servo and put the plug they give you on to those wires on the factory side, and then it plugs into this harness. I don't have that connector in the pins, which is actually not a big deal because I can't get to the servo anyway, the factory one. It's in a terrible spot under the panel to work, and the bolts that hold it on, from what I can see, are behind the oil tank. So I can't remove it anyway. I'd have to literally like pull the engine and then pull the oil tank, and then I could get to the servo. So it's a disaster. So I can't get down there to like pin that onto a connector anyway. So I'm not even upset about that or anything. It's like totally fine. And I contacted Edge. I talked to Jason, and I'm gonna end up cutting this connector off. I've got to mark which ones are which, and cut these wires off, and then I have the schematic to show which wires on here will go to the factory plugs. So I already had to butcher my factory harness to get it even out of the airplane, so it's pretty well junk, which is unfortunate because that was worth something. But at this point I'm going to cut off the two connectors on the factory harness that plug into the wastegate and wire them to the edge harness, and then in the end we'll have the same result. I'll have a plug. It's actually two little plugs that pop right into the wastegate servo, and away we go. All right, so I ripped the heater out of the way. Just had to be done. Kind of a pain, but whatever. I was able to get in there to the servo, and these are the factory plugs off the factory harness. They're not color-coded, but the wires going to the servo itself actually are. So I had to put the plugs back down there and mark on each one of these you know, what color those wires are on the servo, and then that will coordinate with the information they gave me on the edge harness as to which wire goes with what. Okay, so I got everything laid out here, and I'm gonna start working on it. I've stripped back their harness, and the numbers coordinate to the wires are on the inside of this plug that I needed. That was part of the schematic. So here's the deal, you guys. You might be saying, oh, they forgot that little connector, you know, they dropped the ball on that. Well, yeah, I mean, sure, they should have included the connector, and I'm sure they would have gotten me one as quick as possible if we were going to go down that path. This kind of stuff happens. I don't care what you're dealing with. There's going to be some issues. Here's the bottom line. I found the problem. I contacted Jason last night. Thomas is on the other side of the world pretty much, so I don't even know what time it is over there, but I knew what time it is for Jason. So I contacted him. I said, here's what's going on. Here's my thought. If I cut off these factory harness plugs and wire them onto this, I'm up and running. What do you think? And he said, yep, that'll work. He gave me the schematics, the information I needed. We literally had a solution within 5-10 minutes. And it allows me to do the work right here on this bench, not underneath that panel where it's literally horrible to work. So I'm not upset about it at all. You know, like I say, contacted him, we worked through it, we came up with something, you know, came up with a workaround that's going to be great. Wire these in. You know, I stripped everything back so I can do a good job, load it up with heat shrink tubing and all the good stuff, and we'll make, you know, a nice set of connections and make sure it's good and secure, and then we'll move on. So, you know, I'm putting this in here not to make them look bad. I hope I'm trying to actually make them look good. If you think that you know, I mean, most of you guys know when you buy a product or whatever, there's always going to be some stuff. It's just like my shocks. You know, they weren't set up right, the valving and the spring rate and stuff. And I don't know who, you know, that may not even been their fault. I mean, who knows what information they were given or whatever. I don't know. I'm not trying to blame anybody for that either. What I'm saying is, I contacted them and said, hey, I need to get these fixed. I need to get these worked on. And they said, awesome, send them back. We got you. We'll make it happen. We're going to fix them right up. I mean, that's really all you can ask for when you're doing this kind of stuff. So anyway, I'm going to start working on this, and I'll show you what I come up with here. Okay, so I just marked on these. You can see it, but the numbers are on the plug, so I've put, you know, marks on the wires themselves to mark them. As long as I don't rub off those marks, then we'll be okay. Another thing you can do, I'm probably not going to do this because I just don't want to waste a bunch of wire, but one thing you can do is cut these all at a different length. And if you get in trouble, you can always match it back up and figure out which one went where, usually. Okay, just a thought. Okay, I've made all my connections and triple checked everything that got the right sequence. And everything looks good, so I'm just in the process of shrink tubing everything together here to make a nice connection. The thing about shrink tubing to me, in my opinion, what's important to do, let me just a second here. I like to spread out the load with shrink tube, so I'll do it in layers. The middle where the actual connections are will have the most layers, and then it'll go out from there with a less layers, and then maybe one more time with just, you know, the last layer, one layer. And what that does is when you bend the wire, it's kind of spreading out that load. It's resisting bending where you really don't want it to more than it is outside of that and nearby. All right, well, there it is. Got a couple different layers here branching out, and yeah, I feel pretty good about it. I think it's going to work just fine. Like I said, I triple checked everything and made good connections, and got a nice solid wrap on it here to keep it from flexing right there. Okay, quick note on the firewall hole for the harness. My largest bit here goes to 1 3/8, and that wasn't big enough, so I had to take where did I put it? Well, you can take whatever, and you just gotta enlarge the sides of the hole a little bit. You just gotta kind of oval out the sides of the hole 180 degrees apart, because there's a connector that kind of has some ears on it that won't go through this hole. Everything else will. So just kind of, like I say, just kind of ovaled the sides, and then that worked out. All right, so I haven't checked that cylinder that I pulled off a while back and did a little bit of lapping to that valve because it was showing a little low on the leak down. So I thought, shoot, I probably put 10 hours on it or something since I did that, maybe more. I thought I'd check it. And check this out. Literally perfect. That's crazy. All right, I got the wiring harness all strung through and connected to everything on the engine side, and did some various types of standoffs, you know, to hold these wires so they're not fluttering with the air blowing in on them, and working those wires. You know, they're secured, but then they all have a place where they have a section of wire that obviously can move, so when the engine twists under a load, it has some give and a place to spread out that movement along a long section of wire. Still waiting on those fittings, like I said, So I can't finish the fuel or oil system on the outside yet either. Working on the throttle cable right now. So I've got this through here. I found this little deal. It's not necessary because the throttle is being pulled open, which means when you pull where you're fighting the spring, you're trying to shove the cable into the little receiver that goes on the end of this little elbow. This deal here, it goes in there. Okay. So it doesn't take much to make this work, but I went ahead and put this in. It's kind of clean and nice. Okay, throttle cable setup is all done, and it's working pretty well. Now, little pro tip on this, especially if you have one of these little bit stiffer cables. This is a McFarlane throttle, and it has that cable that's wound. It's not a solid wire, but it's a little bit more of like a push and pull, you know, mostly pull, but a little bit of a push cable too, and those are hard to get through this. So leave this off of the throttle body, get it worked on with some lube, some oil, grease, whatever, and work that cable into the tube, and then install the tube on here. It'll just make your life easier. And you got to pay attention. It's a little bit of a deal to get this all lined up and everything just right, but luckily it worked for me first shot. Just pay attention to what you're doing before you cut anything. The geometry on this, actually, this throttle throw is shorter on the fuel injection, so there's wide open, of course, and right there is where it stops, and I've still got a fair amount of room on the travel of this cable, this system. And I'm the type that thinks, well, you should get all you can, because then it makes the throttle less touchy, and you can modulate better when you're riding the slow end of the envelope coming into land and you're giving it little jabs of power. Okay, I got to show you guys my new throttle I built. So I was going to just change the geometry a little bit as I was showing, but I ended up going a little bit further, making a new plate and putting the Heims joint on the back side, extended it to get the extra range I wanted. When I tried moving this actual point down and over and all, it just messed everything up. I was going to redo the whole thing. And I thought, you know, I wouldn't mind this being a little bit higher, and I wouldn't mind it being a little further back, because after moving my seat back and everything, it was actually not like it was hard to reach. Obviously, I have long arms, but it just seemed a little strange, like you're reaching awfully far forward to grab the throttle. So I think this is going to be a little bit better. The harness is in. The harness is in and done. I've just got to do a little bit of wiring over to my ECU switches from there to the harness piece that they give you. These are all the power and grounds for the ECU and the wideband, because it's all integrated into one. And one of the wires has got to have power to it all the time for the ECU, which is no big deal. I'll just wire that on the opposite side of those switches. So anyway, getting pretty close, just waiting on fitting still. All right, so I finished the oil system. I ended up making a turn and coming out and around a little bit. I was going to go straight under. Here, but couldn't get the fittings. I've been waiting for days and days, and they just can't get them in with everything that's going on. So worked with what I had, and actually it was probably better this way, because that was going to be really tough getting that in there, and it's one of those things where it looks and sounds better than it probably is. So I've got to secure this still, but it's all hooked up. I primed it, and I was cranking the motor just to check oil pressure and also to make sure my tach's working, because I had to rewire some of that when I took the TCU out. And the batteries have been sitting for a couple weeks, and I've already done some crank tests, so they're not fully charged. But check this out with this new starter, how fast this thing cranks. It is ridiculous. With a lower compression motor, you know, like this one, and 2 batteries, and that new starter, man, it gets with it. Here, check this out. That is pretty silly. What's up, guys? Hey, we're probably going to end this video here. The system is basically installed. I have just a couple of wires to hook up on the harness for the ECU. It's very straightforward. Power wires that go into that little switch panel that I showed you that I made. One of those 3 wires does need to have power all the time. So it has to be hooked in a little bit differently to make sure that it always has power. And that's pretty typical of an ECU. There's usually a wire like that. I'm not even going to bother showing that. That's very straightforward. I think we've covered enough. This video is probably so ridiculously long that if you're still here, that's amazing. Thank you for watching. Hopefully you guys got something out of this. Maybe it was interesting. Maybe it's helpful. Maybe some of the people watching this are installing this system or contemplating installing this system, and maybe this gave you a decent idea of what to expect. I think the most challenging part of the whole thing is that, you know, they give you, they do as much of it as they can before they send it to you, and they give you good instructions, but every installation is going to be different. Every airplane, every setup, every situation, you're going to be mounting things in different places and having to, you know, route things differently, and maybe this kind of gives you a taste of what to expect in that department. And to me, that's probably the most fun, but also, you know, time-consuming and challenging part of the install. So hopefully it kind of illustrated that and kind of showed you guys, you know, what to expect there. So if Edge wants to use this to help people, you know, with the install, great. That's good with me. You know, it might prove to be helpful. But anyway, thanks for watching. The next video will be the third video kind of in this little series, and probably the last one. And that will be the first start and initial tuning, ground runs, some ground tuning. Obviously, I don't have my shocks back. They haven't even made it there yet. Everything is so delayed and moving so slow right now. I don't know how long that's going to take. Hopefully not too much longer. But in the meantime, it'll give me a chance to do some basic tuning on the ground and just run it for a while. You know, just get some time on it. Make sure the surge tank, the header tank is working properly and there's nothing leaking, and just, you know, put a little time on it and get it kind of dialed in. So probably include that in the next video, and also hopefully the first flight. So it'll be a little bit, you know, before that video comes out, and you know, we'll get there when we get there. So thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate you sticking around and watching this. Hopefully you got something out of it, and we'll see you on the next one.